hacer ajustes. Pero de otro lado, algunos de los países que están aquí con nosotros han tenido, sin embargo, crecimientos muy buenos. Ha sido el caso de Paraguay, en el caso de Costa Rica, el presidente lo puede contar más adelante, estaba demorada una reforma tributaria durante mucho tiempo, es justamente el tipo de cosas que se tienen que hacer, que empezó otra vez a remontar su crecimiento. O en el caso de un país como Ecuador, que es una economía dolarizada y que en su conjunto el hecho de tener un dólar revalorizándose, pues afectaba también su economía. ¿Qué vemos hacia adelante? Digamos, la historia lo que nos muestra es que cada vez que viene un proceso de aumento de tasas de interés, sobre todo de la Reserva Federal de los Estados Unidos, algo pasa en el sistema global. La pregunta entonces es, ¿qué debemos hacer los países latinoamericanos para ajustarnos a una realidad que está ahí? De hecho, con los solos aumentos que se dieron, vimos los efectos, sobre todo en el último trimestre, sumado al hecho de que nuestras economías y sobre todo las economías sudamericanas son economías mucho más abiertas, que tienen una alta dependencia de la economía asiática y principalmente de la China, y que están concentrados sus exportaciones en 5 o 6 productos básicos. Y allí es donde yo creo que la tarea que viene por delante es cómo profundizamos mucho más nuestros procesos de integración y cómo nos preparamos, digamos, para ese momento en que va a haber un clima no tan bueno para hacer el conjunto de reformas estructurales que son muy fáciles de hablar, muy difíciles de implementar, pero que van a ser centrales para darle un mayor espacio al sector privado para crecer. Y creo que eso es lo que vamos a tener que ver en los años por venir.
Una de las razones por las cuales es tan atractivo para los presidentes del mundo venir aquí es poder conversar con empresarios que tienen posibilidades de inversión, etcétera. Y todos los países presentan unas ideas acerca de por qué es atractivo ese país para la inversión extranjera. Yo quería darle a los 3 presidentes la oportunidad de explicar qué tiene su país que no tienen otros para atraer a los inversionistas. O sea, ¿qué tienen de especial ustedes? ¿Por qué no comenzamos con el presidente Lenín Moreno?
Bueno, mira, Moisés, yo creo que si es que hay algo que diferencia al Ecuador de los otros países es la extraordinaria diversidad que tiene un pequeño territorio. El Ecuador tiene riquezas por encima de su suelo y por debajo de su suelo. Por encima de su suelo, pues una diversidad arquitectónica, una diversidad en su clima, una diversidad en su paisaje, en su fauna, en su flora, en sus etnias, inclusive. Es importante que cuando se recorre el Ecuador encuentras diversidad de vestimenta, diversidad de folclore, diversidad de música.
The approach would be to say, well, government's just going to provide the social services. If there's a marginalized group, we'll just do it.
Well, the problem with that is that in Latin America and in many other parts of the world, is that people tend to think like that. But the end result is that you are very inefficient, very slow, and the end result, you have those problems. Because when I look at that, it's when a lot of years we were using that system. That system doesn't work enough, or it's not good enough for solving the problems of the people, or at least not fast enough.
And I think this point of, you've got a pretty developed country, but you still have these marginalized groups of people who need help, can be applied maybe to bring Anne into the discussion to the business world writ large, where there are a lot of successful corporations, businesses doing great in many ways, but it's not as connected to some of the issues you're talking about. That's starting to change with this focus on ESG, on environmental, social, and governance factors. This is something you think a lot about and work a lot on at Bank of America. Can we actually get these, when we think of billions and trillions, the financial markets, the sorts of folks who are here at Davos, can we actually connect them to people who don't have running water or who are recently incarcerated, or can we connect them to those kinds of the people really being left behind in today's economy?
Yes, we can connect them. I think the thing is that it's taken a while to get there. And ESG is really a way, at least from my perspective, a way of thinking, a way of looking at problems. But you then have to bring in our case, because we're a bank, how can we bring capital to the issue? And how can we use the innovation we've used for corporations and clients for many years, hundreds of years, and apply it to this? And we've had success, but it means blended finance, meaning different tranches of financing against a gnarly project that otherwise wouldn't get done. It reduces the risk. It gives different horizons for payback. It allows also outcomes to be determined. So earlier today we were talking about water equity. There is a water equity fund that Gary White and Matt Damon started that we participated in. We gave them the first $5 million into it. It is a $50 million fund. It returns about 3.5% to the investors, and with that money, they can provide water to thousands of people. It's a micro loan, so something that we couldn't do directly, but they can do, and we can provide the financing and also find other partners. And we've been able to take something like that and parlay that to probably in the last year $50 billion worth of investments in whether it's healthcare, water, clean air, women's issues, in a way that we would not have been able to do 5 years ago. It's taken some innovation, it's taken some very good bankers, it's taken partnerships with other financial institutions, NGOs, development banks, philanthropies that we couldn't have even imagined just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a great, the Matt Damon and Gary White example is a great one because, they started out basically working like civil engineers would, digging wells, we need to get water to people, let's go dig another well. Now they've turned into financial engineers.
Right, but that began with, we were one of their earliest contributors. Gary had a checking account with us, and we gave him a philanthropic gift. He sort of took us through what he was trying to do, and it's an evolution. But the evolution can start a revolution, and we've been able to do it well beyond water. We've been able to do it with solar, with wind power, a project we're doing in solar in India that I couldn't have imagined us. And these are on big scales now.
You mentioned this at the beginning of your remarks, and I want to bring Aaron on this point, that it's happening, we're moving, it's a mindset shift, but that it's not happening as quickly as we might want, right? The urgency doesn't seem to be there. We could have had this conversation several years ago. Wouldn't have been as advanced as we might have now. There wouldn't have been as many reports or data points to prove, or as many case studies and examples. But look at the headlines. I mean, there's urgency around equity, right? I mean, there are literally people in the streets in a lot of countries in the world. How do we get there faster?
Well, I think the dominant reality right now is that we're living through a time with very profound interconnected revolutions, economic revolutions, technological revolutions, cultural, political. And so I would say that as important as building sustainable markets is, and it certainly is, we need to build resilient markets that can help us navigate all of this change. And I'll come to economic fairness in just a second.
We're also reforming our country to invest in human capital, in education. We're improving our health system, and we're constructing a digital agenda and heading a process in this new phase. We're going to use technology to bring the country forward. Paraguay has to be seen by the world as a strategic ally of complementary economy and a place to be able to access the markets of the region and the world, and integration is the process that Paraguay requires to be able to go forth and to be interpreted as or seen as a strategic ally. You have all spoken of the hopeful side of Latin America of each of your countries, and I'd like you to answer this question as citizens of Latin America and not so much as presidents of your country. What are these two damned numbers, 8 and 31? 8 is 8%, and America has 8% of the world's population, and 31 is 31% of homicide in
O sea,
Latin
América
America.
Latina con 8% de la
With
población
8% of
mata al
population,
31% de la población del
they
mundo.
kill 31% of the population.
Eso, según las
in the world.
encuestas, es la principal preocupación
And
de
that
América Latina.
is the main
Entonces, si antes
concern
les
of Latin
pregunté
America.
qué hacer y
And
qué decirle a los inversionistas, ahora les pregunto qué hacer y qué
I said,
decirle
what would
a
you
un
say
pueblo
to investors?
latinoamericano
But
que
now I
dice en las
ask,
encuestas
what
que
would
su
you tell
principal angustia, su principal
the
preocupación
people of Latin
es la
America
tasa de homicidio.
who the interviews say that their main concern is the
una buena noticia para Paraguay.
murder
Paraguay tiene
index.
una
That's
tasa
good news for
que
Paraguay because
va
our
disminuyendo año a año. La
percentage
tasa actual de
drops year to
homicidio
year.
doloso, como un poco el punto referenciador con la cual medimos nosotros,
The
es
index
del
that we use gives us
7,3%,
7.3%.
comparando a algunos países
At
de la
its
región,
highest
como dijo
rate.
mi colega el presidente
Whereas in
Alvarado, no voy
other
a hablar de otros
countries,
países, pero
I'm not
Paraguay
going to talk
está con
about
tasas
other countries,
bastante
but
razonables
Paraguay's
en términos de
rates are
porcentaje
much
de
lower
homicidio doloso. De
as
hecho,
far
cuando uno
as
ve la región,
murder
ve algunos
goes.
países que son los que
In the
tienen
region, there are
tasas
some
muy elevadas
countries
que
that
hacen
have
que la región
very, very
se
high
eleve. Pero
percentages,
de
and
todas
that
maneras,
brings up the
no
average for the
estamos
whole
conformes con
region of
eso.
Latin America.
Nosotros identificamos
We
como las principales causas
Consider
de
the main
inseguridad es
causes
justamente la falta de
are
oportunidad. En
of
pequeños
insecurity
distritos
are the
donde
lack is
nosotros
the lack of
tenemos,
opportunities. In small
son, por
districts
ejemplo,
where
exportadores de banana al 90%
they
de la población,
export
los índices de
90% of the
criminalidad se reducen
population
casi al 0,
exports
tanto por ciento. Entonces
bananas,
nosotros estamos
the
enfocando no solamente en un sistema
murder rate
preventivo y
drops
represivo,
90%.
sino
So
construyendo políticas de oportunidad,
what we're
de
doing is to
generación de
create
empleos, de
policies to
fortalecer
generate
nuestra
employment and
capacidad
strengthen
de
our
la construcción de conciencia a través
capability
de
and
políticas públicas
awareness
que
through
permitan generar
public policies
opciones
that allow
de
to
trabajo y de
generate
progreso a las diferentes
work
regiones,
and
identificando cada
progress
región con la
options,
necesidad de inversión que se
identifying
necesita.
each region with the need of
Presidente, su
investment.
vecindario es uno de los peores.
President,
América Central.
your country, your neighbors in Latin America are have a very high rates,
en
don't
América Latina.
don't
En el
they?
caso particular, en
Well,
Costa
yes,
Rica,
the murder
una
rate is
tasa
very
de
high
homicidios que
in
estuvo
Latin
subiendo,
America,
fue
and in
preocupación.
Costa Rica,
Logramos este
our
año que
murder
cerró
rate
revertir esa
was
tendencia.
was
Desde el
rising,
2012
but
venía subiendo la tasa de
from
homicidios y este año que
2012,
cerró la
the murder rate
logramos
was
bajar.
growing, and
Estaba
this
llegando a
last
12
year
homicidios
we
por
managed
cada
to
100,000
reduce
habitantes
it.
y logramos reducir eso a
We were
11
at
punto
12
algo. Entonces, eso es
murders
algo
per
positivo.
100,000 inhabitants, and now we're down to
Lo
11
central
point
que está
something.
acá, en mucha de la
The main
inseguridad,
thing
tiene que ver con la desigualdad social.
in
América Latina
insecurity
sigue
is
siendo una de las
connected
regiones más
to
desiguales del mundo, y otros fenómenos como
inequality.
el narcotráfico.
Latin America is
Cosas
one of the most
interesantes. Lo que se logró en la
unequal
reducción tuvo que ver mucho
regions of the
con
world.
acción operativa, usando datos y estadísticas y ciencia de datos de la policía, y de una forma
Our
preventiva.
statistics
Lo importante
are
que se
drawn
logró
from
fue,
the
por
police
ejemplo,
records.
confiscando armas
And
ilegales.
one
Eso fue uno de
of
los
the
principales
measures we
motivos para
took
esa
to reduce
Ahora, esta
murders
ciencia
was
de datos, la
the confiscation
georreferenciación,
of
es importantísima,
weapons.
ya no solo para el tema de seguridad, sino para combatir la desigualdad. Cuando vemos en los mapas,
We
las
have lots of
principales
inequality in the region,
ubicaciones donde se dan
and when we look
los
at a
crímenes
map
o homicidios o
to see
cierto tipo de
where
actividades,
most murder takes
territorialmente
place,
son zonas muy
we see that
específicas,
territorially
donde se puede
these are
trabajar con una
very
política
specific
social
areas
integral,
where
ya no solo represiva, sino de
what is
oportunidades,
required
y
is a
trabajar en el
policy of
espacio
opportunities.
específico que tiene que ver como lo han hecho exitosamente países
And
en
this has
materia
been
de
done
recreación,
successfully
cultura,
in
deporte,
a number of countries
prevención de
by
drogas, prevención de
creation of
adicciones,
leisure
oportunidades
options,
para
prevention
jóvenes
of
y para
drugs,
mujeres, generación de empleo.
new
Eso yo
opportunities
veo como un
for the
derrotero
youth,
muy
for women,
esperanzador.
the creation of new jobs,
Medellín ha tenido
and
algunas
that
experiencias muy
is very hopeful.
positivas
In
en eso y
Medellin,
ha
for
logrado
instance, there have
revertir
been very
indicadores.
positive
Y creo que eso lo tenemos que
experiences
trasladar
in that respect, and they have
regionalmente y
managed to
entender que este no es un
reduce
problema nacional.
their rates.
Es un problema que nos tiene que
And this is
doler
not
como región.
a problem
Y
that
traer a la
affects us
ecuación
only
la
as a country,
cooperación,
but
es una
rather
palabra que no
as a
estamos
region,
diciendo
and
suficiente
we
en
need
este tiempo.
cooperation.
Cooperar
We are
para
not
resolver esos
cooperating
problemas.
sufficiently to
Pero yo veo
overcome
que hay posibilidades.
these
De hecho, creo que tenemos
these
al alcalde de
scourges.
Medellín en la sala, así que
I know that the
puede
mayor of
que
Medellin
nos ayude a
is
entender este
is
tema.
with us
Presidente
here
Lenin
present, so I'd like him to talk to us on the topic as
Desde
well.
la perspectiva de
President
Ecuador,
Lenin
un país
Moreno,
andino, con todo lo que
from the
implica
perspective
esto para la
of Ecuador, an Andine country, and all that is connected to drugs and narco traffic, drug trafficking. The Ministry of Interior, who controls the police, has carried out a number of actions which has seen a drop in murder rates over the last few years. But there's also a bad side to this, the fact that murder rate has gone up for women. And this is due to an ancient belief where a man thinks that the woman is his property. So feminicides happen when women take decisions on their own accord, and if they take decisions, men feel betrayed, offended, and they resort to this abhorrent action. And to solve this problem, we have to promote values and their practice, and especially help children not fall into these traps by teaching them human rights and basic values from their very early childhood, so that they start understanding that women have a right to choose. And that, I think, is something that is going to contribute enormously to reduce the feminicide rate. Obviously, there are other aspects that play a role in murder rates, criminality related to drug trafficking mainly, and that too is being combated in a very open and frank way through an effective action of the Ministry of Defense, together with the help of the Ministry of Interior, the Home Office. And we are concerned because the rates of drug consumption are on the rise, and that is certainly a huge concern. And we are tackling this problem by promoting values and by imbuing in the youth and in children that they should identify with the beauty of life without resorting to miserable substitutes as drugs. President Moreno, this 8 and 31%. Moises, we can look at this from a different angle. One of the things that is most surprising in what was called the lost generation of the 80s, we had murder rates and criminality rates which were far lower than what we have seen in the last few years, where we can, without a shadow of a doubt, say that they have been the worst years of Latin America by and large. And connecting to what President Alvarado said, I would like to stress that we have to understand that the security policy does not only depend strictly on the police or the army, because it cannot be successful unless each dollar spent is to improve with an extra dollar in social investment, apart from the police and social justice, to tackle the problems that are at the basis of the problems of security. And as President Alvarado said, we have also seen that in many cases we can see where crime takes place, where murder takes place in these small areas, and we can tackle this problem by, for instance, using sport, creating social tissue, creating microfinance, entrepreneurship, and education, because the lack of security scares away the institutions of the state, and that space, that empty space, is taken over by criminality. So that has to be stopped. It has to be tampered, and President Alvarado will know what we did in Costa Rica, because what we have seen is that most of the interns in prisons go back, when they come out of prison, go back to do the same as they were doing before. So what happens in prison is that while the inmate is in prison, the family creates a network to receive him when he comes out. And there is no doubt that there is a thin line that connects all this, which is drug trafficking and a number of other actions that nourish drug trafficking, as is, of course, as has been mentioned, the case of Medellin. They have problems in Medellin with security, with bringing up to date the whole police system, the whole forensic department, and everything that is connected to prisons. Basically, the prisons were headquarters of the criminals that operated from prison. And there are a number of policies that are starting to be successful, and this is not so much an action that governments carry out. Governments have to unite their efforts with cities to be able to tackle these problems. Before giving the floor
to the audience, could we talk about the major humanitarian crisis that we have at the moment in Latin America? And it's the worst we've ever faced, and that's the crisis from Venezuela. Very quickly, because we're running out of time, but I would like to hear what you think about this. So what can we do? What might we be able to do in the face of the tragedy that Venezuela is now going through? Let's begin with you. Well, Paraguay decided that it would break off diplomatic relations with the government of Venezuela. And I think we were the only country in the region that did so. And we were trying to be consistent and joined up in our thinking, because we do have a serious concern. Venezuela was a beacon that shone a light on democracy in Latin America. And if you see what has happened now, I think we have to be very clear-cut and very specific in what we say. We do hope that we'll be able to re-establish dialogue. We hope that there will be a way out, a peaceful way out of the situation. And we do hope that they will find their way back to democracy in Venezuela. But we will certainly support any humanitarian aid that might be given. And, if necessary, in fact, we've discussed this with presidents in the region, particularly those who have the greatest influx of Venezuelans. You see them queuing up and you see them walking along the highways. And you see them, but it is very painful. But these people come out smiling because they want to come into other countries, they want to work. What we therefore need to do is to look at the financial side of this so that we can provide solidarity with those countries who are getting the most number of Venezuelans in. I think this should be a world cause, really, Venezuela. President Alvarado, yes, I agree with what's just been said, really. And I think this is a particular juncture at the moment, and it's complex. It's not just Venezuela. I'd look at Nicaragua as well in the same breath, really. And I think that this is important for Latin America because we have to make sure that the institutions, the democratic institutions, come up with regional solutions. And this has to be part of a mature political approach. I don't think we should isolate these and just pretend that these are national or domestic problems. These impinge on us as well. And I think there's been a discussion on this, and we have to look at what it actually means when we talk about intervention. We're talking about human rights, and Hemingway once said, for whom the bell tolls. Well, it's not just for them that the bell is tolling, it is also for us that it's tolling. And we're listening to that bell tolling. We have that ringing in our ears. And therefore, it is important that we look at this. Venezuela is certainly a dramatic case. And we understand that in Colombia, I think you've got more than 1 million people who have fled. In Costa Rica, and we have about 500,000 Nicaraguans. Not just through that, but because of that, there are more than 80,000 people who have sought refuge in our country. And this is because of a breakdown in democracy. There's no free press and various other problems. And we couldn't just see this as a problem that relates just to Nicaragua or Venezuela. I think we have to see this as part of the well-being of the whole region. And we also have to see this about the trade between all these Central American countries is being affected by that. It is dampening trade. And also remittances aren't being paid either. And a lot of families depend on those remittances which come from abroad. Now, Nicaragua has got negative growth, and this drags down the whole region. So I think saying that we're being interventionist or that this has to be sorted out domestically, I think is a refusal to see that this affects the whole region. And I think if my neighbor is going better, is doing better, both democratically and economically, then of course that is going to redound to my benefit. And I think there's a certain majority that we're talking about in our approach to this. We have to look at what we're doing in the institutions, and I think in this way, by taking that approach, we should find a way out. President Moreno Garces. Thank you, Chair. Before Maduro won in Venezuela, Venezuela had said that, and we had said that any election had to be held democratically, and the opposition should be allowed to stand and to be active, and they should not try and trip them up, as has indeed happened. And there should also be international observers as well, on as broad a front as possible, to check impartially whether the elections had been correct and fair. And we, as we often do, and this is very much part of our policy, we also sought a dialogue so that it would be possible to come up with a peaceful solution. But the answer to our call was negative. And the result of that, I think, has been this exodus of more than 2 million Venezuelans. They have gone particularly to Ecuador and Colombia, Peru and Chile. In Ecuador, the Venezuelan migrants have come in, it's 770,000, and we have respected their rights, and we have provided schooling, health and work. But of course, we have called on the Venezuelan government to themselves sort out the humanitarian crisis that they have. There's about 6,000 are coming into Ecuador, and it's going to over the 3 or 4 months. And these are 6,000 coming in daily over these few months. And we have been in touch with the Ministry of Communication of Venezuela, and they said it wasn't. They said it's not 6,000 a day. it's only 5,300. So, no, I'm not surprised, because we all sometimes have our problems with numbers, and we know ministers over communication would also have certain problems with numbers. So, the solution, as we see it, and as President Alvarado has said, is that we have to all get together to sort this out together. It has to be a joint effort. And I don't believe in being interventionist, I don't believe in military intervention, but I would say we should intervene in a way that we could call for human rights to be respected, and that is certainly not happening at the moment in Venezuela. And what we hope is, because the Venezuelan government would be sensitive to this, and that they come to a dialogue as the best way to resolve this issue, so that they can really start going down a path to democracy, which is what the people of Venezuela deserve. Now, question from the... Could I ask, there was a question you asked just now, and about something terrible happened in Ecuador, where a Venezuelan killed a woman. And of course, there was something of a reaction against Venezuelans throughout the society. And I think perhaps there were certain militia or certain groups that set themselves up. I can't quite remember the full details of it, but there were certain groups that were sort of got involved. Let's talk about that case. Let's say something about that. Yeah, I'll tell you about that. Now, there were certain brigades, the professional brigades that we set up. And there were people from the Ministry of Labor and also from Social Ministry and also Human Rights. What we wanted to make sure was that the companies were actually having proper work contracts, and that people weren't going into precarious work. But also we saw that our brethren were coming in from Venezuela, but they had no documentation. They had absolutely no documentation. And to get an identity document, it shouldn't be too difficult. And therefore, we had people coming in without those documents. But there was, the thing was that now some people might have been imprisoned, freed, and then dropped off at the borders. And therefore, that was why there was that suspicion. And they often didn't want to tell us what their past was. They didn't want to tell us what their criminal record might be. And they weren't providing us with any police records at all. And they didn't want to, and this, of course, caused concern. And that is why we are asking people to say what their police records are. We would like to have some kind of background check. Now, you spoke about the murder of a woman by a Venezuelan. Doubtless, this was terrible, and it's terrible to see such acts. And this is something that everyone is really concerned about. But if we look at the statistics, it is possible that this may well happen. But of course, what we want to do is try and avoid things. And I think what we can do to help things is to get people's criminal records. We can call upon the Venezuelan government to produce that information. And I think that would help people coming in to our area. Now, President Moreno, there's an economic side to all of this. How would you view it? Well, I think what really shocks us is that if you look at the UN numbers for the last 4 years, then about 2.5 million have left, and about 1.8 million have, particularly Syrians, and have come into Europe. So you've always spoken about this, and of course the news is, the importance of the news depends on where that news is being released. But we can see that the terrible things have happened here. And I think that what is quite admirable in Latin America, and I think this holds good for all countries, is that they have welcomed in these people. There's the Nicaraguans gone into Costa Rica, there are Haitians who have gone to Chile, and to other Central Americans have gone into Mexico. But never have we had such huge movement of people. And what we see, and if you read the history of such migrations, the numbers are just going to grow. Because you perhaps set up a family in Ecuador, and they might get a job, they might establish themselves, and then they're going to call in the rest of their family. So what we're seeing is, first, that we have to think very seriously. Let's not consider it to be something like it is in Jordan, where you have refugee camps with more than 1 million people in them, and they haven't been there just 1 year. They've been there 10 years, even 15 years, and that would be very serious indeed for our countries. So we have to think, how can we integrate these people? And to do that, we need to give them the wherewithal, be it in Quito, be it in Lima, be it in Buenos Aires, wherever, so that we can welcome them in, so that we can provide the public services, education, housing, primary health care, because the healthcare level in Venezuela is terrible at the moment, and you can see people coming in across the border, and there are actually sick bays on the border, so that these people who are coming in, some of them are bringing malaria with them, and some of them are bringing measles as well. So we've got these sick bays on the border so that they don't infect the rest of the population. But the situation for Venezuelans is terrible, because they have lost what they basically had. They have absolutely no goods, no services, there's no respect really. And therefore, I would agree with what the other presidents have said, that this is not something that we can just see as someone else's problem. We all need to act together here. And by acting together, so that we can bring about a Venezuela which will be different to what it was, so that we can, however, bring together all these different parties in the country. And now in our bank, we do certain household surveys, and the rate of impoverishment of the Venezuelans is huge. It's really happening apace. And you can look at the drop-off in oil income, and basically the country is imploding. And people are just getting out sort of while they can. Now, I think there's Rodrigo Mañarca in the room. He's the minister of the Cuban trade minister. Now, could I ask you? Now, we know that Cuba has a lot of influence in Venezuela. So what advice are you giving the Venezuelans at the moment? What are you telling the Venezuelans so that they can get a handle on this crisis?
I'm Vice President of the European Commission, but if
Oh, sorry, is Rodrigo Mañarca in the room? Is the person he was just now? He was here just now? Oh, well, sorry. So Cuba's gone AWOL in this conversation. I'm sorry.
Bueno, you have go ahead. Please be brief.
I'll be very brief. So, Honorable President, I'm Jyrki Katainen, Vice President of European Commission. I have a question to President Abdo Benitez, as we belong to the same group in a sense that Mercosur countries are negotiating with the European Commission on trade agreement. We believe that it would enhance trade between 500 million Europeans and significant amount of citizens of your countries, and help foreign direct investments to come, for instance, to your country. So we have very good chances to finalize successfully trade negotiations during this year, but it needs a strong political push and commitment. So how would you describe from Mercosur's side the current situation? And second question is, how do you see the future of Mercosur? What is the dynamism of Mercosur at the moment?
Brevemente, por favor, porque se nos está acabando el tiempo.
Bueno.
Adelante.
¿Cómo?
No, que la respuesta.
Bueno,
Mercosur, well, the last meeting that we had between the presidents of Mercosur, we decided that we would move forward and we would be very want to bring to an end this negotiation between Mercosur and the European Union. Now, this is, of course, mainly between the larger countries, France, Italy, Brazil, and there are certain existing agreements. But as Mercosur, we are convinced that this is an integration that we have to do as soon as we can so that we can bring to a successful conclusion this process. Well, I don't think I have, do I have time to say any more? Yeah, you can finish off. Yes, finish it off. I'm convinced now, because this is being discussed, a lot of us are talking about integration today and whether that's the way forward or not. And I think the history of humanity is a history of integration. Every country has its own system of internal integration, different cultures come together, and so on. And these have grown together and merged over time. So what I would say, talking about our integration between Mercosur and the European Union, is that we should try and deepen these efforts worldwide. And indeed, we believe that perhaps some of the problem has been when it becomes too ideological. I think it has to be based on a complementarity, and it has to be based on the potential of each country. And therefore, we very much want to strengthen this process. Thank you, Chair. In the National Assembly of Venezuela, they chose unanimously who their members. The Lima Group feels that President Maduro has usurped the office of president, and the vote was not legitimate, and therefore they're not recognizing him as president of Venezuela. At the moment, there's a power vacuum, and the parliament is trying to sort that out. And it should be Juan Guaido, who is the speaker, who should take that. Now, if the parliament decides that Juan Guaido would be appointed, would that be recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela if he gets appointed? A very simple question for you all. A very simple question. President Moreno, don't you want to ask him? Yeah, that's what Morenos are like. We like to share. We like to share. We have no relationship with the government of Venezuela, so it's in default just at the moment. So this doesn't mean that we can't talk to the Venezuelans. And if there is a structure in place where the assembly chooses an official, and so that they can see a way and who's going to try and tackle the problem, why not? We would support. Now, what we would have liked is that there be dialogue and new elections. That's what we'd like to see. We would like to see elections where people would enjoy the freedom to choose who governs them. If we see there's been many shortcomings in the whole electoral procedure. So I would say that it is necessary to look again at the constitution of Venezuela, have to look at the laws, and also have to look at what has happened in the past. Now, I don't know whether the assembly would have the power to appoint someone as a president. I think we would really have to look at what the rules say. Thank you. I think the regional governments have to speak with one voice, indeed, as does the international community. Now, this is a legal issue that you're raising here. You're talking about the legitimacy or non-legitimacy of this. But also, it's a case of realpolitik. Now, I think what we have to look at is what is best for the people of Venezuela. Now, the actual people. What is best for the people of Nicaragua? You can't just think in general terms or legalistic terms. But you have to think, will this resolve the crisis or not? I think that is the nub of the issue. What is the way in which we're going to resolve this? And I think that is what we have to be looking at. Now, we believe in institutions. We believe in democratic institutions. And I think it has to be the people who can have an open, fair elections with observers, and that they can then determine their fate. And that is what we would like to see in Venezuela and Nicaragua. Now, indeed, this was in a route that was followed in many Latin American countries in the past, and it stopped conflicts. So I think we have to look at an overall joined-up and holistic approach to this. Well, my foreign minister is with me, and he's looking at me. And so he doesn't want me to say too much, I know that. He wants me to be diplomatic, but I'm not going to be. We would recognize Mr. Orillo as a president because we believe that we have to send out a clear message. And this is going to help redress the balance. And this could then lead to a broad dialogue. Anything that helps to liberate Venezuela would get our support and our vote.
Identifíquese, por favor.
Please tell us who you are. Lourdes Casanova from the Cornell University in New York. Chinese investment is not only growing, but when there were changes of government in Brazil and when it went from Rousseff to Temer, for example, in Brazil, now I think it's a bit naive to think that there's going to be a different investment, that it's going to help develop the region, because this has a political effect, because China has got about 10% of PDVSA, the oil company in Venezuela, and therefore, has there been any big change in how we see Chinese investment? What do presidents think about that? Well, just one of them. Which of them are you asking? Okay, President Moreno. We don't have much time. President Moreno. Which? There's two Morenos. The President Moreno. You have to choose one of the two. The President of Ecuador. Because I think he would give a good answer to this. Now, without a doubt, China is a very important player in the world economy. In recent years, Ecuador has welcomed China in, and we have had loans. So we've been able to build highways, airports, and we've been able to create infrastructure. And this has been supplied by China. And we have also seen that there have been some drawbacks. So I went to China a month ago so that I could talk to Xi Jinping and to say that we had certain issues. And the ambassador said that we would resolve those issues. So it would be possible for us to continue working with the great people of China in the future and with the government of China so that they can continue to help us fund our development. And clearly, we work with multilateral organizations as one at the same time, of course. We believe we could say we trust that there will be no problems at the moment by resolving the issues now. Now, actually, about $1 million has been released by China so that we can continue our development. Please tell us who you are. I'm also from Cornell. Now, Mr. Alvarado, there has been a tax reform which has been difficult both within the country and outside of it. What have been your keys to achieving that fiscal reform? And President Moreno, when will these tax reforms come in so that the region can grow? Well, in Costa Rica, we'd had more than 20 years with the problem with the public finances. So basically, there was a high level of indebtedness, and the key to what we did was, well, it sounds simple now. I mean, basically, where there's a will, there's a way. It was determination that we had. We had a 90-day strike in the education sector, a strike. I mean, it was a peaceful strike, but it was still a strike. But we had to do this so that we could make this change. Because if you actually bring in these reforms, and if you sort out your problems of liquidity, it means that we didn't have to cut any of our social programs. It also meant that there was stable funding of public services, and there is a stability, which is what we need so that we can really relaunch a contracting economy. But ultimately, I would put it all down to determination, because otherwise I wouldn't be talking about growth of Costa Rica now. I'd be here asking, cap in hand, asking for support. Well, very quickly. Countries who do not have a tax take of more than 15%, it's going to be very difficult for them to become viable. And there are still Latin American countries who are below that 15% line. But for years, though, we had a demographic bonus. Now, I think a country such as the UK, it took 65 years for people to come start retiring. So you have 20% of the population retiring. And at the same time, it's 20-25 years. So there is a great tax pressure in our countries, and these are huge tax pressures. And the sooner we can deal with this, the better. But as the presidents have said, it doesn't make anybody popular when you do this, when you change these systems. But you have to do it, and it is transformative. Now, I think there was a question down here.
Thank you. Ishan Tharoor at the Washington Post. Just earlier this afternoon, President Bolsonaro of Brazil celebrated a number of recent victories for center-right or right-wing governments in the region. I would ask the Honorable Presidents, do you see a broader political realignment or consolidation taking place in Latin America? And what are your hopes for the new right-wing government in Brasilia?
Could you please select one of the presidents?
I defer the selection to you.
Who would like to answer about whether Latin America is moving to the right? Well, we have to ask President Moreno. We asked President Moreno. No, you see, we moved from the center this way very quickly. Okay. I think the challenge that we have as a region is we need to make progress without necessarily having a total consensus. I think we have to have shared goals, that we want diversity. There's diversity up here on this panel. But there's also an ability to work together. And I think what we have to aspire to is that as a region. I also believe that any extreme is not going to benefit the world. And therefore, I think we have to try and strike balances here and work together. And that is what I would go for, rather than talk about whether it's extreme left or extreme right. I think what people really care about, rather than those, is their own well-being. And I think that is something that unites us all, and I think we should work on that. Alberto Moreno, Lenin Moreno, Carlos Alvarado and Maria Abdo Benitez have given us a great snapshot of the situation of what the region is facing, and they've told us what they're doing in their countries to... So, applause, please. So, an applause. There you are.